got root? There's a local privilege escalation vulnerability in Linux that's been there for over 12 years that'll get you there.
Morning, John. So looks like you've got a lovely story for us this morning about a local privilege escalation in Linux. So tell us about it.
Yeah, thanks, Manny. So actually the researchers at Qualys recently announced a vulnerability that's actually got a CVE. It's CVE 2021-4034. They're calling it PwnKit. But it's what it actually is affecting here is there's a tool on pretty much all major Linux distributions called pkexec. It's actually the PolicyKit exec tool, and it's very similar to sudo. It allows programs to it's kind of like similar to sudo, so it allows them to execute commands as another user. And it's been, in Linux distributions and vulnerable for at least about 12 years. So it's been in this state and no one really has known about it. I believe Qualys had notified all the major vendors last year, and they're just now kind of announcing this discovery that this is out there. I checked at least Ubuntu, and it looks like there's a patch pushed out on the 12th, January 12th, that has this fixed in it. But anything that hasn't been patched this month, I would definitely get on top of this right away, because this is a very simple vulnerability to exploit. It's only about like 15 to 20 lines of C code, and there are proof of concept codes that work out there on the internet. All you have to do is just search like GitHub for that CVE number that I mentioned, and you'll find that there are several versions of it out there. What I would caution, not that I found this, but I would caution, if you're going to just look for exploit code, read through it first, make sure it's not doing anything weird and somebody's like trying to trick you into, just make sure that you actually, what the code's doing before you run it. In any event, it does work. It looks like it's a very simple kind of vulnerability to exploit. So I would expect that people will start seeing this being used. It is a local privilege escalation vulnerability, so someone would have to get onto the system with an account first. So, maybe they'll find a vulnerability. Maybe you already have local access to a machine as a regular user. You could use this to escalate your privileges to root. Or if they find a vulnerability, maybe in the Apache or something, and they could run something as the user nobody, from there they could escalate to root as well. That might be like a remote to local to root type of exploit path that I could see very probable. The other thing that I was thinking about, and I don't know how, I haven't looked into this yet because this story kind of just broke overnight about this vulnerability, is there's a lot of embedded IoT distributions out there with kind of it's a very light version of Linux that runs on a lot of these devices, especially for, your security camera DVRs and, lots of other, embedded equipment that's out there. Those operating systems, generally speaking, don't get patched very often. So that is an area I would be very concerned about, especially if they have this PolicyKit pkexec binary on their system, and which is usually in user bin pkexec is where it's located. So that's something I would be worried about, because those types of devices generally don't get patched as often, and I could see them being ripe for the picking in terms of being accessed and using this to gain root and then do whatever they need to do beyond that point. So just something for people to be aware of and take a look at and make sure that they get these systems patched as quickly as possible. And from what I see, it looks like most of the major vendors have already released patches for this month. I think that's why Qualys has only announced this vulnerability now. They're being very good about giving all the vendors time to have this patch, figured out, worked out, and distributed to their platforms before Qualys actually, made an official announcement about discovering it last year.
So I guess a question that I have is, and I don't know if you will know the answer to this, but so pkexec do we know how widely used that is across Linux distributions?
I don't know. Well, it's definitely on all of them. So if you have Ubuntu, Debian, all the major ones, Ubuntu, Debian, Gentoo, I'm trying to think what else is out there, Red Hat, CentOS, all the major ones are going to have pkexec installed by default. I haven't looked into the embedded IoT space and some of those other very light versions of Linux to see whether they have it on there as well. I suspect they do, because it is kind of like a standard binary tool used to execute commands as a different user. So, but I haven't looked into it yet. But I would say all major Linux distributions have this tool installed by default.
By default, okay, and that's not a tool that there would be guidelines on how to potentially disable it as part of standard practice.
Yeah, I didn't see any recommendations in the story about disabling it. That's a good question. I think the best route is to obtain the patch and patch it. Yeah. I'm not sure that there's an easy way to just disable it.
Right. Yeah, and I think, as you said, the probably the bigger concern, although this seems like a pretty big concern in general, but like you said, the IoT devices out there where it's typically not as well known that a lot of these devices are actually in fact running Linux in the background, right? And like you said, you just have to have some sort of low-level account, right? So you have a guest account or something that gets you in the front door, and then you can, escalate from that point. So, yeah, I can see how this can get pretty dangerous pretty quickly. And patching is going to be the key here, right? Is, like you said, it's been known for at least a little while now. It's just getting these patches pushed out. But we know out there, specifically in the IoT space, patching doesn't happen that frequently or that widely across that universe, and that universe is massive, right? So bad guys are going to have a field day with this, right? I mean, I have to imagine that this is going to be something that we're going to be reading about and seeing stories about for the next few weeks, if not months.
Possibly, yeah. And the other thing that concerns me is I know a lot of larger corporations and businesses sometimes don't patch right away. So a lot of times they'll do it quarterly and apply patches to a lot of their systems. So I know a lot of big businesses, they would get on top of this right away to make sure that this patch is rolled out. It's a serious one outside of the normal quarterly patch schedule. So definitely something to be aware of. The only saving grace really is that it is a local privilege escalation vulnerability, which, that would be the barrier for entry that somebody has to be able to gain, at least, a regular user access in order to, exploit it. But once you get on there, it's a very trivially simple exploit to detonate on the machine and, get root. I was reading through the article while you were talking there, from the one from Qualys, where they talk about it, and I'd recommend people take a read over of that if they're interested in this vulnerability. There is a mitigation step that they mentioned. You can just disable the set UID bit on pkexec on the binary itself, which will prevent it from being able to execute programs as different users. I don't know how that's going to impact other programs that you might have on the system, other applications running that might need to use that legitimately. So, caveat emptor to using that as a mitigation if there is no patch available for your operating system. But, there is a path to do that, it looks like. But it might break a few things along the way, depending on what you do on that system.
Gotcha. And what was, I don't know if you mentioned in the beginning, but what was the CVSS score on that vulnerability?
It's a good question. I'm going to look here to see if they give a number on it. I'm sure they do. Looking.
Yeah, I'm selfishly asking because it's a tie-in to my story later on.
Right. I would imagine it's up there. Actually, it's not as well. At least Red Hat is scoring it at 7.8. Probably because you need local privilege, or you need local access to the system in order to exploit it.
Yeah, 7.8. I mean, it's still relatively high on that scale. So,
right.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Anyway,
Awesome.
Definitely one that I would recommend people take a look at. If you're a red team person or a pen tester, this is a good one to throw into your bag of tricks, because it's very easy to use. I would be surprised to see people not using this during, red team engagements, or even, hackers using it to exploit systems that they're able to get, regular user permission level access to.